Scott, why did you name the preeminent Canadian medical device design company after an echinoderm that sheds its arm as a form of defense?
Great question. Well, the starfish are very resilient that way. If you cut off one of their arms, I don't know if they can shed them, but certainly they can regrow them. So they're very interesting form, and that sort of a dispersed intelligence. And I like the metaphor of the different arms, kind of give us flexibility, what we could do for our business. Because when we created the name, we didn't know what we were going to do exactly.
So it was kind of a more generalist approach, reaching out to different directions to figure out where you could take what you were doing back then, correct?
Yeah, I guess you could say that. There was I recall trying to come up with a logo and having an artist do various different. And then it turns out when you try to draw a starfish, which are actually properly called sea stars, um, that they all turn into people because they end up with these. But then you have to think about your relationship to the posture, and one of the postures we looked at kind of to me looked like an opera singer. It was very bold, and another one was more of in a calm, reflective kind of posture. And I really struggled with which one to choose, and so I decided I would wad them up, throw them against the wall from the papers that they're printed on, and pick the one that was closest to the wall. And so I did
Love,
that, and I picked the one closest to the wall, and I was disappointed. So I picked the opera singer.
love it. Truly evidence based.
There you go. So you kind of knew, but you can't access it without going having some sort of an emotional experience. I
That's
think
fair
that's
enough.
a nice little metaphor for a lot of innovative development.
Great. Well, welcome to Outside the Podcast, where we chat with people shaping the future of health tech and healthcare. On this podcast, we chat with founders, innovators, investors, and occasionally founders of leading medical device companies that literally shape the medical devices that will help us live healthier, happier lives. This time around, we're lucky to have with us the inimitable Scott Phillips, president, founder, and CEO of StarFish Medical. Scott, how are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on your show. It's fun to talk to you.
And listeners, if you're not on video, Scott has a gorgeous purple background that he showed to me is not green screen, which is very admirable. It's a very nice shade of purple, and I'm very jealous because I've got curtains in my background that I'm using for audio suppression. So going back on topic, you graduated from ENFIS in 1989 from UBC, Scott, but you started in medical technology only in the late 90s. Can you tell us a little bit about those pre-Starfish experiences and which ones meant the most to you?
Sure. I mean, so when you graduate from engineering school, unlike medical school, you don't actually have the abilities to be a great engineer. You have like the raw academic underpinnings, but you still got to kind of learn how to do it. So I actually went to work in a startup company in lithium batteries. That was the early days of lithium batteries at that time, and had a really wonderful time for about 3, 4 years, uh, learning from some really wonderful engineers. And had a chance to really have an impact on design for manufacturing process, a bunch of things that are a little more rare in British Columbia, to be honest, in a sort of high tech field. Traveled for a bit, climbed a lot of Andean mountains, sailed around Cape Horn, did sort of adventure things like that, and ended up in Calgary because of my girlfriend at the time was doing her medical degree there, and and had a chance to work in all sorts of things, natural gas instruments, dental equipment, exercise equipment, um, and in Calgary. And they were all super interesting and challenging. And I actually made the transition in Calgary to being a contractor, which is one of the reasons why I was able to do a diverse range of things. So when we moved to Victoria in the sort of mid-late 90s, I was well established as a contract engineer, got into audio speakers after that. So we made planar magnetic, which had been one of the most sort of high-end audiophile type technologies, and brought it into consumer products in a startup that I was one of the core engineers in Vancouver in the late 90s, and learned again from a bunch of people It just, engineering is really exciting when you're deeply immersed in it. There's so many levels of problems, all the way up to, are we designing the right thing for the right people that's going to help them do things? So, I could go on and on. That first 10 years was wonderful and very influential. And the company I think of as starting around 1999, which was when I started taking on bigger projects that required me to move out of the spare bedroom.
Mhm. What was that experience like going from an employee of a company to being a contractor? It seems like there's a lot more independence in terms of what you can do, but were there any, I guess, takeaways from that transition that affected the choices that you made later on in your career?
Yeah, I think I felt like as a contractor, of course, you don't have the security. Um, but at that stage of my life, I wasn't very concerned about security. And maybe I'm kind of wired that way anyways. I had in mind I would start a company. So it was kind of like a halfway step to having a company.
Mhm.
Um, Also, as a contractor, it seems like you get drawn in, or the way I was doing it anyways, at a higher level where you're able to have conversations about the strategy of what they're trying to achieve and so on. Kind of got exposed a couple of levels higher in the organizations than I had been as an employee. Um, that was was interesting, challenging. Uh, Engineering, as in its nature, or at least product development engineering, tends to be longer things. Rarely do you get drawn into to just a very short term. Uh, Maybe it's just also my nature, and to try to keep going deeper and deeper into the problems. Um, so it's kind of like half and half. You're sort of like an employee, but sort of not. Um, but you also have the flexibility. You got diversity. You can have 2 or 3 clients, and I like that.
Mhm. So it seems like there was more engagement with kind of the thought leaders of the businesses that you worked with in particular. And that probably served you well when you were starting off Starfish. So if I read correctly, you started off Starfish with a specific contract with a company that was developing an ophthalmic imaging system, which you
Mhm.
designed in a room with a sleeping baby in the background. Can you tell us about the origin story of Starfish Medical
Oh,
beyond throwing papers at a
sure.
wall?
So that's there you go. Doing papers was pretty fun too. So yeah, we lived in so my girlfriend, we got married in the six to Victoria. She did her medical residency there. We're still in Victoria. And first baby was 97. I was still contracting. And so a lot of that early contract work was done in that way. I kind of count Starfish as starting because it really was an outgrowth of that work. I count it as starting in 1999 because that's when we got a chance to work. I mean me, uh, work on a ophthalmic ultrasound system with a company that was sort of from New York, had spun out of Cornell University, but one of the main doctors was in Vancouver, which was what found us. And actually, we had a website, which right now sounds like, of course, you have a website. But in 1997, when we did that, it was still a little bit exotic. I'd say. Um, and so there was a sleeping baby. And in fact, that project was of a scale that I needed probably 6 or 8 other engineers to work with. And so I had to move out of the spare bedroom. And so that's when I considered the company starting in 1999. And we moved out of the spare bedroom, basically got some desks in an office that some other friends had in an engineering company. And so when the guys from New York came to visit us, they had a place to come look at us. Because everybody was kind of a contractor, and of course, had no capital to fund anything. Had to live uh, one month to month and get enough money in to pay our debts every month. And um, so it was that was a big adventure. And so we went roughly in less than a year from basic needs to a working complex thing the size of a desk that did ultrasound imaging of your eye in high frequency. Could do all sorts of mechanical contortions and look at your eye from different angles and process all the data and generate images that unlike anything anybody had ever seen before. that we showed at the American Academy of Ophthalmology meeting in Dallas. That was a giant leap forward in the aspiration of what our company.
I guess my main question that jumps off that is, how did that initial project influence the further development of Starfish into the future? It seems like part of the influence that it had was the fact that you need to bring more engineers on. But was it your first experience at that time in terms of managing a team of engineers to work on a biomedical engineering project, or am I wrong in that assumption?
That's absolutely true. So at the time, the company wasn't called Starfish. It was called Scott Phillips Engineering. That was
I like the
cleverly
ring of
named
that.
company. Yeah, I know, it was the weirdest thing. And actually, I remember when I was in Alberta working for the Alberta Research Council, and the first month, the head of the department came up to me and said, "Well, you're a contract, so who should we write the contract? Who should we write the check out to? How about Scott Phillips Engineering?" I said, "Okay, that sounds fine." So that's literally how much thought went into the name. And so that name kind of stuck for as a sort of working thing, and ultimately turned into a corporation, or incorporated entity. And um, so then, sorry, I forgot what question I was answering.
I guess I was asking in particular, was that your first experience
Oh,
working with a team of
with a
biomedical
team, yeah,
engineers?
yeah.
Yeah.
So absolutely. So it wasn't really a biomedical company. It was just a
Mhm,
product design company,
mhm.
and just happened that the first project that came along was biomedical. Because I studied engineering physics, sort of a little more broad based, and I worked in batteries, and I worked in natural gas instruments and audio speakers. So nothing medical in any of that really worked. Um, we leaned in and kind of figured it out, hired other people, had more expertise, eventually got regulatory infrastructure, quality system, got products through the US and European regulators in the early years. So we kind of worked ourselves into that space. So absolutely had not worked with biomedical engineers, although none of the people that were working on this project were biomedical engineers. Biomedical engineering is, um, in essence, you're probably either a mechanical engineer or an electrical engineer, uh, with some capability in physiology or anatomy. It's really what a biomedical engineer is, right? Uh, Mostly. So, so we figured it out. But,
Mhm.
uh, but running other engineers was, like anything else, just a skill you got to learn, right? So,
Yeah. What was that transition like, going from kind of a sole proprietor working by yourself as a contractor to running a team? Were there any particular difficulties that you faced, especially number one, creating a new product, number two, learning the quality management system space, all the regulations, etc.? Were there any particular hiccups that you surmounted, which you took lessons from that you still apply today?
sure, that's a great question. Um, there are lots of lessons learned. Like I was dealing with the clients and this complex thing, and they were scattered across North America. The other people on the client side had to deal with budgeting, had to deal with money, and we didn't have any like accountants or anything like that. We're winging that stuff too. Um, and then learning to run engineers. So I guess that I feel very lucky that a lot of my intuition at the time, which was to be highly transparent with the team, here's what's going on, here's the money that's coming in, here's when you're going to get paid, here's the other work that's coming in, just to keep everybody engaged. And it was
Mhm,
kind of required. They could have gone off and done other things. So I needed to even though I couldn't even always pay them exactly on time because that depended on when the client would pay us. So
mhm,
that was one thing. And that's continued to be our philosophy as a company. Um, I would say, uh, also what's the right amount of transparency to have with clients? How do you communicate? I mean, you don't need to tell them every little thing, but you need to explain to them what risks they're taking on, what you've discovered that could affect their trajectory. There's always a
mhm,
temptation in this kind of work, if you discover something that might be bad news to the client, to sort of keep it close to your chest in case maybe you could get it solved and you don't have to reveal it to them. Um, but we never really chose that approach. And I think that's stood us in good stead as well. That's really their risk. There's so
Mhm,
many other things that we bumped into as issues and skills, but those are
mhm. Those are really interesting takeaway points in particular, but there are kind of 2 points of questioning here that come off of that. Number 1 is, did that project specifically then, uh, become the impetus for you to focus the rest of your work into the future in the biomedical engineering space, or was there another particular impetus at hand?
um, so basically around that time, there was different potential directions, but I started to get religion on focus. It's always one of the things in entrepreneurship that, and it's a mistake that a lot of entrepreneurs make, is that they basically say, "Hey, we specialize in everything that anybody needs. That's our specialty. We can do everything. No job is too big or too small." Whenever I hear that on the side of a van or see it on the side of a van, I think that guy's an idiot. That's what it really means. What it really means is you're not good at anything. And so you actually, there's a paradox that the more you specialize, the more credibility that you have, and you just have to specialize the right amount to have the right amount of market. So it's um, so we decided to narrow, we meaning me again, just to med, um, which was a little scary because there is no medical industry in Victoria. There's
Mhm,
hardly one in Vancouver. So what does it mean to narrow down to and to only working on things that there's not a bunch of local market? Um, but the nice features of medical are that there are lots of niches. It's complex. The margins in the final product are reasonable enough that companies can afford to invest in the design and get it right. And we like the fact that there's complex regulatory because that will scare away people that are not as well organized.
mhm, mhm. And to those who are more new to the field of biomedical engineering and design companies overall, what is a design company and what does it do?
Oh, sure. So, and that varies a lot from company to company. Everybody's got a different take on it. But at the broadest level, it's a services, professional services company. Companies come to us, they need a product designed, and then they hire us to do that work. And what we deliver back to them uh, is a design intellectual property in essence. But of course, we've got and documentation, testing results, something they could manufacture. In fact, pretty early on, we decided to build our own small scale manufacturing capacity so we could deliver actual products out to the field for them in the early going.
Mhm. And
So
to
companies in the space tend to either become highly innovative type companies where they're trying to come up with some brand new thing, or they tend to migrate the other way towards uh, where they contract to deliver something that meets a specification, and then they want to have an agreement on exactly what they're going to make right up front.
Mhm,
So we just probably because of my personality, kind of migrated more towards the innovation side.
mhm, mhm. I guess to push back on that point as well, why specifically would someone need a design company that has a broad approach to helping bring a product from ideation all the way to market? Might sound like a stupid question, but at what point does the work begin and what point does the work end? And why couldn't someone just patchwork, bring in their own staff in the process of bringing their own startup to life?
Yeah, I totally could. Um, but usually if you look at who the people are that do these companies,
Mhm,
um, they they have some things they're really good at, and probably they're really good at sort of core research. They may be good at market assessment. Um, uh, Sometimes they're really good at doing their own in-house engineering, but not necessarily at all, right? So, and they don't need to. If they've got the ability to develop the proof of concept technology, then you can outsource. You don't need to go build a whole big infrastructure. That's one of the challenges of startups is that they get funded incrementally, right? They don't start with $20 million in the bank. They start with $500,000 in the bank. And they're afraid that what happens if they run out of money? Then they got to let people go. All that knowledge and investment disappears. So we kind of address that problem. We cost more than for a bit of work than a particular engineer might, but who's to say you're going to get the really great one? And if you have to pause for a while, none of that knowledge disappears. Plus, we're really good.
Mm-hmm. So to an extent, you're kind of de-risking the experience by having plenty of in-house knowledge that you offer as a service from end to end of kind of the ideation, design to small scale manufacturing process, which is super thoughtful because, as you said again, if people can't necessarily find the right staff necessary to bring a already high risk startup to life, then what service you're offering allows for people to patch into essentially tried, true people who know what they're doing so that the process is a bit more de-risked, a bit less terrifying, so that it can actually happen.
Yeah, well, I think that in some ways I could think of us like a deal lawyer. You want to go do $100 million transaction to buy a company and buy two companies, merge them together or something, some sort of complex thing. You can do it yourself, or you can go find a company that does that all day long, every day, and it's going to cost you whatever, $100,000 or $1 million to do that transaction, but maybe they'll save you $50 million of not screwing it up, right? So, and you don't go into the deal attorney and say, okay, I've got this whole deal figured out. I want exactly like this. Please just write out the contract exactly like this. What you do, if you're smart, is you go in and say, I've never done $100 million deal before. So can you tell me what I should be thinking about so I can do the right deal here? That's why you hire a professional services firm, because they know how to do it.
So at what point did Scott Phillips Medical become StarFish Medical?
Phillips Engineering. Probably about 2004. We were already heavily doing medical work. There was some other medical things like a glaucoma screening machine for a company in Germany that we were working on in a partnership. And so then we just doubled down and said, okay, we're going to be just StarFish Medical. And we've never looked back. We never regretted narrowing, and we didn't wish that we narrowed more. That was just, was about the right narrowing. Complex electromechanical devices selling to a North America wide market. And we were always America wide as well in our focus. And a lot of companies in our space tend to be a little narrower in terms of their geographic focus, or either they're not too wide, either they're wider than us. Sometimes they're industrial design, mechanical design, covering whatever defense, consumer devices, and medical. We never wished that we were doing that either. Feels about the right weight, size, shape of market. It's always, it's nobody, there's no rules around any of that stuff, right? Different things. But when you're making those decisions, you don't know how it's going to go.
Exactly. So in terms of not knowing how to make decisions, one of the tools that kind of defines to some extent StarFish Medical, if I've read it correctly online, is the Pathfinder process. So for those who can't necessarily, I guess, see anything that I'm talking about right now, which is probably most of you if you're not watching the video, there's this diagram that kind of outlines the discrete processes or steps taken by StarFish in order to bring a product from end to end. Now, I'm not gonna belabor the point and ask you to describe that entire process end to end, Scott, unless you really want to. But the question that I have here is, which one or two experiences or projects were most impactful to how or why you felt the need to articulate the process as the Pathfinder, diagram that's published online?
Sure. So, well, there's a couple of pictures that we have online. And so one of the interesting things when you sell intangibles, so you sell ideas more or less, sell like product design, is how do you make it feel more tangible? So you give it a name. So that's one of our inputs. Just for when you sell the Pathfinder, it's kind of like a sales tool almost. And you name it, and then it becomes easier to sell.
Mhm.
Although when you look at, so Pathfinder to us is actually a product definition framework. What are all the things that we have to think about as part of defining the right product? And as you go through your career as an engineer and working on different things, what you bump into is you spend a year on something or 6 months on something, and then you realize you designed the wrong thing. It's very, very common, very easy to get into that. You realize there's another level of insight you needed to have had earlier on. So you're always kind of yearning for some sort of a framework to prevent that. So that's essentially what Pathfinder is. It's a list of things that we need to consider. And it's more than just making the technology work. It can be IP, it can be a regulatory path, understanding the margins that are needed, reimbursement. So I would say as an engineer, I had a variety of formative experiences early on that led me to this problem. For example, when I was working in lithium batteries, and I had been directed to address a leakage issue that I had in the batteries, and I spent probably 4 or 5 months working on this problem, and then realized that I'd set up the test conditions wrong. I didn't actually understand the success criteria, and so it just makes you just right.
Yes.
In I, I just I didn't do anything that was bad for the batteries, but I made them way more leakage than they needed to be. And so I spent on there was always too many things to do. So I spent way too much time studying way more thoroughly than this. So that's how they talk about engineers on the glass half full, right? The engineer looks at half full glass and says that glass is twice as big as it needs to be. But it's an efficiency problem. So anyway, we created Pathfinder, and then also the StarFish commercialization process, which you showed the chart of, but that's not the same thing. But it's also what we're trying to get across with that diagram is the essence of what's called the phase gate process. Phase gates is a sort of there's points in time where you need to crystallize the answers to some questions to keep yourself from driving off a cliff. And for example, we had a product quite a few years back, where we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in 2 years. Maybe we spent $1 million or so at that time of the client's money working on this thing. We were getting ready for transfer to manufacturing, and the client was in the same time trying to get the technology refined. And we allowed ourselves to talk about manufacturing transfer at the same time as we had this vexing little problem of the technology not working. And ultimately the whole thing failed. Like that technology approach failed. The client had to go raise a bunch more money. It damaged our relationship with them, even though it was their problem. I mean, nobody wins unless everybody wins, right?
Yeah.
Right. So we got way more disciplined after that to make sure that we had at the end of the conceptual development phase, we could say yes to a list of about 20 or 30 things, just to prevent that sort of issue where you get misaligned. You're busy spending a lot of energy on finishing something while something else is not actually meeting the required level.
Mm-hmm. So if we could simplify that down to how you would explain that to a 5-year-old, how you explain the entire process of what you just described to a 5-year-old.
What I just said?
Yeah.
Well, once in a while, you have to stop and ask yourself, are we going the right direction or not? And you have to be super disciplined about it. That's how you describe it to a 5-year-old. And you do that with process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that the structure is absolutely necessary in the extremely complex environment of medical devices, because there's like clinical strategy, IP, reimbursement, et cetera. There's so much to pack in that if you don't formalize it and organize it, it can be very, very easy to get lost. But in particular, you've mentioned this kind of vaguely, and I just want to consolidate an answer here. Why is all this attention to design, regulatory, and financial control necessary from the start of the medical device design process specifically,
Yeah,
or is it
great.
necessary?
Yeah. Well, I think once again, as you do medical device entrepreneurship, which is
Mhm.
in some sense, you could think of Starfish started as thinking of itself as an engineering company and gradually more or less morphed into a entrepreneurship consulting company, right? It's because it doesn't help anybody if you design a product that fails, right? There's a framework called Lean Startup you might have heard of that.
Yes.
It sort of asks, what are the biggest risks to the venture? How can we address those in order, starting from the biggest ones? Um, and the hardest one is always, is anybody going to buy this thing?
Mhm.
It's whatever you can go ask them if they will, but actually that's what people do and what they say they'll do are often different things. Um, so, um, so it's tricky. So we become very interested in designing with the end in mind,
Yeah.
right? At the end, in the case for many entrepreneurial startups, if they want to sell their company, they start almost with who's going to buy this? Why are they going to buy it? And is it going to be a big enough exit, enough sale to justify all the work that went into it? Because you're solving a big enough problem in a meaningful way. Makes sense. So, I mean, it seems obvious, although it's amazing how many people don't start with that approach. They start with, hey, I invented a cool thing. I'm going to start a company. And, it's important to have a cool thing that you invent. I mean, the ideal thing actually is that you realize there's a giant problem. Start with the problem and then work your way back to the technology.
Mhm.
Although you can start from either spot. Uh, but uh, in any case, in either case, you've got to ask yourself very honestly whether you've got answers to all of these big questions in order to say you have a company. There's another little saying in startups, which is fail fast. You want to prove that there's a reason why your thing won't work. Then don't don't just ignore that. Like, if it's not going to work, then kill it. There's lots
Mhm.
of ideas. Go find another idea that your destiny for the rest of your life is not uh, just spend your life on a thing that's not going to be successful. It's a there's kind of a fallacy whenever you hear an entrepreneur talk, and they often know that somebody asks, "What lessons did you take from all this?" And they'll say the answer is, "I never gave up." So you should never give up, which is dumb advice. Listen,
You're really killing the entrepreneurship vibe here.
well, as an entrepreneur myself, I can make fun of us a little bit, but the answer is you should continually confirm that you're going on a good path. If
Yes.
you're not, then go find something else. You're not giving up on yourself. You're giving up on an idea, which is not the same as you. I tell you, I was contacted last month by a company that said, we're finally reached the end of our rope. Looks like we don't really have a market. Uh, Not working out. It was a company we've known for a while, and they've spent over 20 years working on their startup. They spent $30 million. And now they're finally realizing something they probably really could have known 15 years ago. There's not really a market for what they've been working on.
Mhm.
They should have spent the last 15 years working on something else.
Mhm. And that's pretty hard hitting overall. So I guess if the design process that you and your company help implement is so important to help entrepreneurs fail early if they don't pass a design date so that they can save time and save money, then why don't all entrepreneurs in the health tech market engage with engineering design companies? Why don't they all just go through the process?
They could arguably figure those insights out themselves, but whether they do or not, that's the nobody wants to think their baby's ugly, right? It's easy to fall into the thing that the idea is yours and it's you, and you conflate yourself with this venture, and it's your sense of self-worth and pride and whatever. So you lose the ability to be objective about this thing. You think of, you're just overcoming the naysayers, but some of the naysayers you should listen to. Some of them you shouldn't. Some of you should. It's complex, right?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I know that my mom tells me that I was really ugly when I was a baby. So, sometimes you think your baby's ugly.
And look how great you turned out. So
I know you flatter me, but regardless, to kind of turn the conversation back to the medical device and design space, one thing that I've seen and that motivated the start of this podcast overall was really the increasing interest that I see from physicians who want to enter the medical device design or medical device company space.
mhm.
You recently interviewed doctors McCann and Eklund during one of your events under the umbrella of the medical device playbook. But can you summarize what the optimum role and foreseeable pitfalls are for these fledgling clinician medtech executives?
Yeah, absolutely. So those guys people can watch that. It's online, starfishmedical.com/webinars. Just want to watch that one and other talks.
Love the plug.
We picked those guys as presenters because they're both super accomplished and they're both
Yes.
clinicians. And so Dr. Lindsay McCann is in Vancouver, and he was one of the developers of the drug-eluting stent. So which became a giant multi-billion-dollar industry. And so he was involved at the beginning of a company called Angiotech, which they commercialized their device, which was called Paclitaxel. I'm trying to remember now. And it was the very best device to prevent
Restenosis.
restenosis of stents. And so super interesting. He was involved early on, clinical trials and so on. But he didn't get drawn into the operation of the company because he grabbed some shares, had some advisory role on the company, but he was interested in maintaining his clinical practice. And to this day, he's still a very busy clinician involved in advising a number of startup companies, investing in them. They help them to become successful. That's a nice role for a clinician to sort of keep your finger in innovation, pay attention, make yourself available to them to help them understand. It's one of the problems that most med tech startups are founded by engineers. So and they don't have sort of very direct experience of the clinical environment usually. So it's helpful to have a clinician involved. So Dr. Clog was a completely different. He was quite a well-regarded cardiothoracic surgeon, I think in Boston, New York, and during some of that, he sort of conceived a product that was to extract clots of the heart, basically, and because there was a lot of people dying during clot removal surgeries, which are open heart procedures. So it was a catheter approach to a open heart procedure. I'm trying to recall the name of that product now. Anyway, he told the story during the interview and how he basically, during the process of that, decided to basically stop being a clinician and shift all of his focus over to running startup companies. And he became very successful at that. They sold it for, I can't recall, $100 million or something. And then based on that, he's now running another company called PavMed that's commercializing a variety of products. It's public on the NASDAQ exchange. So it's, which is a pretty advanced form of business. So he's sort of jumped track, had a whole clinical career, and now he's got an entrepreneurial medtech career as a CEO. And you can do anything in between. Often clinicians have to be careful of a couple of things. One is that I think in clinical practice, it's important to project competence, calmness, like you know what you're doing, even if you're not totally sure. It's kind of the bedside manner kind of a thing, uh, which can actually it can really do you a disservice when you're dealing with the technical uncertainties,
Mhm.
because you project that aura of confidence and knowing what you're talking about in areas where you really don't, then can make very bad.
Mhm.
So I think that's a psychological kind of framework you need to adopt.
Mhm.
Recognize the uncertainty, the fundamental uncertainty of the technical problems you got.
Mhm. I guess with regard to the two different paths that those two clinicians slash previous clinicians took, what do you think are the pitfalls or steps to avoid pitfalls that clinicians can keep in mind now if they choose to go down either of those paths, either supporting startups or getting into a med tech career themselves?
Mhm. I certainly would encourage clinicians to get involved in med tech, um, and to because it's research, but it's your sort of practical research, right? Like you can do it while you're doing your clinical practice, which trying out different kinds of devices. You might be doing cadaver studies with some surgical device, or um, it's fun, interesting. Um, so in terms of pitfalls, um, I think one of them is that clinicians often are extremely busy as clinicians. And I think also clinicians get that way by, very high performing kind of people and tend to take on a lot of things, and they can overcommit. So if you take on a commitment and they don't follow through, and then all your partners are, you're dropping the ball with your partners, which is easy to do because it's a new area. You're not sure what to do. Maybe it doesn't always feel as productive as doing another surgery. Um, then, I think that's just something that comes with the personality profile of who these people are, right?
Mhm.
Um, I think also have to be willing to recognize that product, there's a bit of a learning curve to it, and it's not always going to feel productive.
Yeah, that's fair enough. It's an entirely different area of knowledge. And as you said, that projection of calmness, competence, can impose some barriers to learning an entirely new field where there are so many complexities that need to be handled effectively in order for things to go right. But speaking of complexity and handling things well, what were the most memorable successes and the most memorable failure of a project that Starfish has undertaken that you can share?
Yeah. So there's different ways to measure success. I like to measure success by clinical impact more so than by technical triumph.
Okay.
Although, of course, they're fun if they go together. Um, for example, we worked with a company called Novodac, which is a company doing tissue fluorescence, so measuring blood flow, perfusion in the body. And my first application was skin transplant, um, and making sure that there was enough uh, blood flowing in the nutrition so it's viable. And I'll talk about another reason that's interesting in a sec. So it was a big scramble to get them on the market fast enough to meet the demands of their distribution partner. And we had to design a lot of things in a big hurry and rapidly transfer to manufacturing. We ended up building the first 500 units in our offices. Oh yeah. Um, and they were able to retain that partnership, get launched. They moved, I think they did up around 500 units in their first year of things the size of fridges. Like these are big complex machines.
Jeez.
And, and they did all the genius optic stuff themselves. I don't want to take credit for that, but and it was a very, very smart company. And they subsequently were able to move into endoscopic type applications, and ultimately they were able to get sold for $1 billion. So it was which as a startup that became the most successful medtech startup in Canadian history at that time. and they were sold to Stryker, which still has a major R&D, and I guess it's primarily R&D and yeah, some manufacturing as well in Burnaby to this day. So and so that's nice too. We were selling to a Canadian company. It's nice that they were able to stay Canadian. So they're part of a multinational, but they still have a major local presence.
Mhm.
I consider that to be a good solid success, right?
Mhm.
Get them to market, help them to get the right thing on the market and retain their partnerships, and then ultimately build themselves to a very successful outcome. I should add that one of the reasons they became very successful uh, was because of regulatory changes, that actually reimbursement changes. So what happened in the U.S. market, which was the primary market, um, that the Medicare stopped reimbursing for any failed hospital procedures.
Mhm.
So if you had to do it again, you got no more money.
It was out your pocket.
And yeah, that's right. So actually, it's kind of interesting as an illustration of the importance of the financial model to the success or to the business design. For although it's all, patient outcomes and health and so on, those are all interesting. When you actually look at how people behave, they care a lot more if there's money at stake.
Mhm.
And if they had to redo a skin flap, they would say, "Oh, too bad, we have to do a skin flap again. Oh well, we'll get paid again." But when they stopped getting paid again, they started caring a lot more about making sure it went well the first time, which created the demand for a machine that could help them know that that would happen.
Mhm.
So kind of, we could not have been successful prior to that change in the reimbursement environment.
Mhm.
So in terms of a failure, there was one I recall where it was to do with a radiation therapy calibration system we were working on. And it used a series of films in a special plastic block. It was all very complex the way it was designed. And it was very special exotic polymer that acted like gamma. It would act like the body in the presence of gamma irradiation. So they could use it to calibrate radiation therapy. And when it went out on the market, we finally got it ready, and they got a commercial CEO, and he went out to the market, talked to the potential distributors and buyers, and came back and said, "Okay, we've made a huge mistake. This product, there's the market in the time that we were developing this, the market has moved to a digital approach. The days of film are gone, and somehow we missed that. In not we at Starfish. Wouldn't want to take that, but that um, the sort of, that would be called product management, sort of just figuring out what the market need is and how it will fit in the market.
Mhm.
They got it wrong. In fact, they got it so wrong they decided not to launch it at all. So that, but I always
Woof.
feel somewhat responsible when a company goes down a road that we were in the middle of and we
Yeah.
didn't advise them, right? So let's say I feel maybe others told me not to take so much ownership, but that I feel like partly on us to get them to ask the right question.
Mhm. Mhm. So, I mean, it seems like you've had a plethora of experiences through your work with Starfish. And if I dig into a lot of the material that's available online, you share a lot of your knowledge and goodwill as the leader of your company and as a leader in the med tech space overall. Certainly, part of that may be marketing strategy, but you also share some really important knowledge to impart on those who are just beginning to enter the space and don't understand the massive complexities of this huge industry overall. While your actions have undoubtedly done a lot of good, on a previous podcast, you hinted that that at some points, goodwill that essentially you spout and that you try to give can sometimes backfire. Can you share any stories detailing your experience with this in the health tech space?
Um, sure. So I mean, so we do try to do a giving first kind of approach on content and stuff. So on our website, and if somebody reads it, understands it, uses it for their own benefit, never contact us, that's great. It's
Mhm.
a just we just want to help companies um, take a bigger view of what they can do to get entrepreneurs inspired. I guess it's a grinding thing to be an entrepreneur,
It is.
and it's kind of, you need some encouragement. So it's nice to support that. In terms of, the goodwill, I think that it's the kind of question about transparency. Sometimes you share, hey, here's the issue that we see. We think you should be concerned about that. It's not always received. Different people have different approaches to how maybe they see that as as an insult to their capability or something, right?
Mhm.
Say, maybe that's a sign we shouldn't be working with them if we can't have open dialogues. So that's happened before.
Mhm.
Um, uh, that's probably the most common situation where we try to be open with with the risks and the challenges as we see them. Sometimes that can get interpreted as we're just selfishly trying to uh, uh, protect ourselves.
Yeah.
So you've kind of got to earn your trust in this business, just like any others. But there's this so complex that it takes a little while to earn that trust.
Yeah.
That when you say something, it's not from a point of view of covering your ass. It's actually from a point of view of trying to be helpful and useful so that we together can do something complex. So
Mhm.
uh, I can tell you that there's been hundreds of different client relationships and they've gone all different directions.
Yeah.
And when things are not going well, which can happen, then nobody's happy with anybody. That's
Yeah.
it's just how it is.
Exactly. Yeah. And that could be very difficult to handle overall. But
Yeah.
to end on a slightly happier note, or I guess not, maybe not happy, but maybe a little more of a forward thinking note. What's the next big thing that you're doing or that you see will make a big impact on the world of health tech overall?
Yeah, that's a great question. So uh, so we're known as electromechanical design specialists, and we do all sorts of surgical imaging, uh, 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 implant kind of technologies. We've added a lot of biotech. That's a big up and coming area. Diagnostic platforms, uh, advanced cellular therapies. So all these therapies where you essentially customize cells back in the body. Um, and we think that's going to be huge, and that's already huge. It's
Mhm.
actually much bigger than the medical technology itself. And so I think that's an area we're very excited to explore. So we're adding. I never imagined I'd have biologists working for us, but here we are. Got
Mhm.
clean rooms. We've got a whole biotech department. So
Mhm.
that's probably in addition to, we're going to continue doubling down on, lasers and ultrasound and all the stuff we've been known for already. I think there's a really interesting combination. Uh,
Mhm. Well, it seems like the sky's the limit for what you can achieve and structure so that things go right with Starfish. But regardless, thanks for making time to come on. I understand that you're really busy, and I appreciate the fact that you gave such frank, direct answers to my questions. It's certainly admirable and quite helpful to understand the intricacies of what got you to where you are and what troubles people may face when they try to get into this really complex space.
there you go. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I hope that your listeners will really enjoy the insights here.
Thank you so much. Till next time.